Hey, Econ Kids. This is Mod 9, Supply and Demand. Now we're dealing with quantity controls. So if you just watched the video on price controls, you'll understand that the government can come in when the price is messed up. For example, the market price isn't what people are thinking it should be, or a producer says the market price isn't maybe what it should be. So either way, we can put some kind of price control on there, either to raise it up a little bit or to lower it a little bit, but it messes with our perfect system of supply and demand. This does kind of the same thing, except instead this time, when the government is looking at supply and demand, rather than try and fix the price, they're going to say, you know what? The quantity is what's off here. And they can do some things to try to put a quantity control in. So you're going to look today at what happens when we put quantity controls in, who's going to benefit, who's going to lose when we do that. So today, controlling quantities, probably the part about controlling quantities that's the most interesting is you can do it, but you have to use something like license or permit to sort of control this quota. So what will happen in your supply and demand is you're going to get some supply and demand curve, right? It's going to look like this. So I got supply here, demand here. And in this case, what the problem is going to be is that this particular quantity at equilibrium, for some reason, is deemed to be too much. We're taking too many fish, we're polluting too much into the air, something is causing a problem, right? Like whatever, one of those two things. So if we use fishing as an example, that's not a bad one. If we use fishing as an example, with this quantity down here, Q at equilibrium, we're taking so many fish in the market that the fish don't even have the ability to reproduce. So we're going to fish ourselves right out of a fishing industry. And you would think that the fishermen wouldn't do that. But the problem is the fish are sort of like a common area good. Like if the fish is out there, you're a fisherman, I'm a fisherman, you could get it, I could get it. So it's kind of a race to see who can get the fish first. And if I get it before you do, then the fish is mine, right? But if it's just swimming out there, it could be anybody's. So because of that, the fishermen are out there trying to get as many fish as possible. And because of that, they will actually fish themselves right out of a job. So what do we do as a country to try to fix that? Well, we say, hey, you know what? It's a good idea to have fish. So we are going to put a quota on how many fish can be taken. And we understand that a sustainable amount of fish will exist if we go at a quota here. So this is our quantity that the government is going to put on, and this is going to be called a quota. Now, this quota is only going to work if it's less than the equilibrium quantity. Okay, if it's over here, no one's going to care. They're going to just go to the equilibrium quantity. But if it's less than, people will they're going to stop at the quota. So how can we get people to stop at the quota? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to say, here, demanders, you have to pay this much. So this is the price demanders pay. Suppliers, you guys are going to get this much here. So this is the price suppliers get. So this is going to be like a difference here. So how do we jack this price up on these demanders to make them pay more when we know suppliers are only dealing with this? This is our license or our permit. So this value here, which is oftentimes called quota rent, okay? So think of this. This is the rent, right? If you rent an apartment, you are paying money for the right to use it, right? If you're renting a car, you're paying money for the right to use it. So this rent is going to be paid as a quota rent, and it's going to be the value or the amount of the license or the permit. So then what happens? The supplier is going to get this much here in terms of supply. That's what the price they're going to get. But then they have to pay this permit or fee up to here, right? Which is then they're going to pass on to the consumer, and the consumer has to pay this price up here, which is going to result in our supply and demand line being up here in terms of price. So we've fixed the price, right, up here, and the quantity here. This much, in terms of rent, is actually going to go to the government. And then they can do whatever they want with that. That's government revenue from the fishing license that they're putting on there. And what they could do, if you think about fishing, would be maybe they can restock some lakes, or they could work on some pollution, or they could do something like that that's going to be a positive thing for the fishing industry with this particular money. If this example isn't fishing and it's something like pollution, same concept. We're putting something on here that's going to be like a permit or something, and we're going to put that permit in here, and that permit value is going to make it so that it's more expensive for me to pollute. And then someone's going to come up with the quota is going to be how much air pollution we think is necessary, or not necessary, but allowable, right? We have to have some of it. We can't just have no air pollution. I mean, then we'd have no electricity and no cars or no anything. So we're going to have an allowable amount of air pollution, and then we put a price on how much you're willing to pay for a permit to be able to pollute. And then we measure it. The government sets that up there, and we give that permit to those businesses. Sometimes we'll let those businesses trade the permits with each other, and it can come up with some sort of value. If it's cheaper for me to pay you for the permit than it is for me to clean up my dirty factory, then I'm going to buy that permit from you. If it's cheaper for me to clean up my factory than it is to buy a permit, then I'm going to clean up the factory. But it doesn't matter, because what we'll know for sure is that this amount down here is what's going to be achieved. So that's sort of an economic solution to the problem, like a tradable permit situation. We can talk more about that in class, but it is interesting to see. So in this case, we had a wedge drived in there, right? There's my quota, there's my wedge. The area over here that they have labeled deadweight loss, we'll talk about that in another section. But this area, sometimes when we cannot get to our equilibrium point, the area that is defined by that, we call it deadweight loss, because it's an area that we used to be able to get, but because we're choosing to do something, we cannot get there any longer. So in this case, the quota is preventing us to get to the equilibrium, so that triangle there would be a deadweight loss. What happens with these things? This is just some stuff in your notes that talks about, like, oh, there's a wedge shoved in there called quota rent. The difference between the two is causing that to happen. The license holder is the one who's going to have to pay to get it up there. You could trade those licenses or permits. You can look at that if you pause the video. And then last but not least, are these things inefficient? Yes. Is there some deadweight loss to society? Yes. Does there end up being illegal activity? Yes. In the case of fishing, what we find is people will overfish anyway. Instead of, if this is the United States, they'll go register their boat someplace else so that they don't have to obey the law. That's a big problem. Whatever they can do to sort of get around the quota, they're going to do that. And then it ends up being with wasted resources, because they're spending all their time trying to figure out how to beat the quota than just doing what they're supposed to be doing in the first place. So that would be quantity controls. Again, if we threw a price control on here, and every once in a while they'll do this, so I'll leave you with this one. If for some reason we wanted a price control that was going to do the same thing as my quantity control, I have to get this price and that quantity. And probably the only way I can do that is to be up here. And up here, if you remember from the last video, that has to be a price ceiling. Nope, my fault. A price floor up here, okay? And that price floor would actually get us to produce here. But remember, the problem with the price floor, when we put that on, is that sometimes, there's incentive for suppliers to want to supply more because they can get more money for their product. So it's like, yes, you got this price, you probably got that quantity, but if a surplus is created, you may end up over here. But the closest thing to getting this to happen would be a binding price floor. With that being said, quantities and price controls, those things can get you. It gets us away from our supply and demand. Sometimes maybe it's necessary. Till next time.